Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Origami, which was designed by Christian Giove. And in this little card game, players are going to be creating different origami shapes from a variety of different animals in a bunch of different suits. You have like birds and barnyard animals and animals from the savannah. And all of these cards are going to give you points and abilities in a variety of different ways. And first I'll explain how the game plays, and then I'll jump into my review. The game comes with 5 different sets of origami animals. We have ones found in the ocean, these are found in the savannah, these are found in the sky, these over here can be found in your lawn, and lastly, ones on the farm. And at the start of the game, you're going to choose one of these sets for each player in the game. And for instance, we could do these 3 right here, and we will get rid of any of the excess sets and then shuffle these up to create our draw deck. Each player will now draw cards from the top of the deck until the fold value on their cards reaches or exceeds 10. And if you look at the cards right here, you'll see this little number within the fold is that number. So we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Well, we exceeded 10, which means that this is going to be our starting hand. And once everybody does this, whoever has the lowest number of folds in their hand is going to get this wonderful little folded origami first place marker. At this point, the last thing that we need to do for setup is to draw the top 4 cards from the deck and put them into a face-up card row in the middle of the table. Okay, we're now ready for the first turn of the game, and on each player's turn, they're going to choose one action out of 3 potential options. The first is pretty simple. All they have to do is draw cards from the middle of the table, and they can take as many cards as they want as long as the fold value on those cards does not exceed 4. So that means this butterfly over here, which is worth 4 folds, is the only card we could potentially take right now. Or we could go over here and grab this spider for 3 folds, and then this chick over here for 1 fold, because that is going to equal 4. These will get added into our hand, and our turn is now over, and we'll pass our turn to the next player to the left, and then we, of course, are going to refill the card row. Let's now go ahead and talk about the second action option you can do on your turn, which is playing cards from your hand into your tableau. Now, if we look at the cards in a little more detail, you'll see there is a larger number in the top left, which is usually about twice what the fold value of that specific card is. And this is going to be the cost in which you actually need to play the card. So if we want to play this monkey down, we need to get rid of 2 folds worth of cards. Well, this caterpillar right here has 2 folds on it, so we can discard this caterpillar over here and then play the monkey down. And it's important to note that you must always pay this number exactly. You cannot overpay with folds. You must have the right amount in order to create that specific piece of origami. It's also worth noting the little red symbols in the left-hand side of the card are the number of victory points this card will be worth when it's in the tableau. And as soon as we put this down, we see an instant effect. This says we can discard 1 card to draw 2 cards from the top of the deck. And that means that perhaps we would get rid of this 1 fold value chick right here and draw 2 more. And it looks like in this case, we got a chicken and an eagle with quite a few folds on it. So I think that was a pretty good play. And with that, we are done with our action, and play would continue going over to the person on the left. In order to show you the third action option, let's now go ahead and get this spider built. We see that it costs 6, so we can get rid of this dove and the snake, which is 3 and 3 folds, and we can now put this in front of us. And now you'll notice that this says special action, whereas the monkey said instant action. Now, when it comes back around to us on a future turn, we can now activate this spider in order to do the text down at the bottom. You do not evaluate this when you place the card down. This is the third thing that you can do on your turn. You can do this right here. It says you can draw from the draw line cards worth exactly 6 folds. So this is a much more powerful version of the standard draw action, which gets you up to 4, although you have to exactly meet 6. So right now we could look out here, and there's a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 2. So in this case, we would probably take the 4 and a 2, and this is a pretty good draw action for us thanks to the spider right here. At this point, you now know all of the options available to the players on the turn, but I do want to show you the third type of card. So let's go ahead and get this ant built. We see it has a cost of 4, so we can get rid of this eagle that has 4 folds right there on it. And when we put this ant down, we must put it on top of one of our previously played origamis, because we're never allowed to have more than 2 face up in our area at any given moment. So that means we could put it down here on top of the monkey or the spider. And if we cover up the spider, then we'd lose access to this special action right here. So we'd probably put it over onto the monkey. But in the future, if we were to play down another card from our area, we would have to cover up the spider, because you have to keep these 2 columns as even as possible. So we could potentially do this, and now we no longer have access to the spider's ability. But if we look down here at the ant, we can see the last type of card is scoring. This says it's worth 5 victory points if you have 2 or more ants, and it is totally okay if this gets covered up at some point later on in the game. When the game is over, you are going to sum up all of the points on your cards, which again are the little red icons, and this ant will activate at that point. So players are going to continue playing the game, and we're going to get deeper and deeper into this draw deck. And once it is empty, we're going to go ahead and reshuffle the discard pile and turn that into a new draw deck. And once we go through that draw deck the second time, the end game is then triggered. We're going to reshuffle the discard pile and put this out once again. We will then complete actions until we get to the person who has the starting player token. Then everybody will get one more turn, and at that point, the game will be over. And as I mentioned before, you will just sum up all of the little red icons as well as any potential scoring cards, and whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. Let's now begin the review for Origami by starting with a few positive points. And the first of these has to do with the cards as currency mechanism and how Origami tweaks it around a little bit. So this is obviously far from the first game where you have to spend cards from your hand in order to play other cards down. But the first thing that sticks out is that normally you have to spend X cards to pay for X cost on that card. But in this case, you have to spend folds to get these cards placed down. And each card has a much smaller number right next to the cost, which is the number of folds that you're getting rid of. So it's not a one-to-one nature when you're getting rid of cards. You have definite solid hand management decisions to come into play as you are trying to figure out how to spend these cards to play the other ones down. But the other thing that's going on here is that you must hit that cost exactly. You cannot overshoot with the number of folds because Origami is a precise process and you need only just the correct number of folds to make these given little animals on the cards, thematically of course. But mechanically what that means is when you come back to the hand management decisions, you have to really add this and try to make it so that you can exactly match the fold cost of the cards you want to play, and you will find yourself trying to draft cards from the middle of the table just for their fold cost, and not necessarily because, oh, this is a big fold cost. You'll be like, no, I really need a 2-fold, not a 1-fold, not a 3-fold. I really want a 2 so that I can play these out in the most efficient manner possible and then still have the other cards hopefully left in your hand to maybe combo off the first one that you played down. So I think it's a neat idea having to hit that cost exactly and having the variable currencies on each individual card that work well for the gameplay. For positive number 2, I'd like to highlight the satisfying and interesting combos that can come into play with the cards as you play them down onto the table. Many of the cards in the game are instant effects, and lots of those effects allow you to draft new cards into your hand or even play new cards from your hand down onto the table in addition to the previous Origami that you just put down. And I've definitely seen situations where people are drafting cards in certain ways and they're kind of building up a big hand, and suddenly they have an explosive turn where they play a card which let them play another card which lets them like maybe get a discount over here and maybe even get a third card played down or something like that. And those big turns can be very satisfying when you are actually doing it, but also the planning process as you are trying to work your way towards those situations. And some of these combos can also be kicked off by the special actions that can be evaluated over and over again on each individual turn for some of the Origami that you're putting down in front of you as well. So yeah, the combos are definitely there. You have to work for them a little bit, but they do pay off and they can be quite satisfying. Lastly, we have positive number 3, and this is going to be a quick one. I just have to mention the wonderful artwork that is on these cards. I just think that they really pulled off the Origami aesthetic. Of course, they look a little bit too real, and I think if you read the details in the rules, it talks about it being kind of like magical origami or something like that. So you're not going to be learning specific actual origami folds, but the kind of folded nature of the art that are on all these cards is really nice to look at, and I think adds to the overall gameplay experience. All right, let's now move into a couple neutral points for the game. And the first of these has to do with the opposite side of those satisfying combos and stuff that you can pull off. And that is that this game does sometimes lend itself towards going kind of dry with the resources that you have in your hand. I have seen situations where myself or one of my opponents kind of plays out a nice big combo and then they have pretty much no cards in their hand. And that means their next turn, they're going to be drafting 1 or 2, or maybe if they're lucky, 3 cards from the middle. And on their following turn, they're probably drafting again. And maybe the next turn, the third time in a row, they're drafting. And so there can be these lulls between the action that can be a little bit slow, especially if you have somebody kind of doing a little bit of analysis paralysis across the table. Maybe they have the big hand and they're trying to math together all of the pieces to their combo. And you're sitting there like, all I'm doing is drawing 2 cards on my turn. Can we just speed this up so I can get there and then, get back into the fun and analysis? And I don't think this is necessarily a problem with the game because invariably with this kind of system, you are going to have feast or famine as you spend a bunch of stuff to get some really nice things out. But it is something that I thought was worth noting. For neutral point number 2, I'd like to call out specifically one of the 5 different animal suits, and that is the bird deck. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because they are much more interactive with your opponents than all of the other suits combined even. And another way to say that is that birds can be quite mean in this game, and that means that you could play down cards that will cause your opponents to discard cards from the hand, or maybe you steal cards from your hand, or a couple other ways that you can just interact with their plans and kind of mess things up. And the reason this is a neutral point is because it's nice that the game provides you with the option to play with this or not, because if you're sitting around the table with people who are just not going to be down with that kind of gameplay, they just don't like take that type things at all, well then just leave the bird suit in the box and shuffle the rest of them up and you're totally fine. Or maybe you're playing with people who like to get in each other's faces, then you bring those in and the game is certainly going to have more tension as you become worried about whether or not somebody's going to play one of those down and just kind of mess up your plans. So I like that the game gives you the ability to decide just how interactive you want it to be. But this is a neutral point because honestly for me, I'm probably not going to play with the birds anymore because the couple times I have, it's just kind of left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth as I have this great plan and it just gets destroyed as I lose that one key card from my hand, which to me is not necessarily fun, but other people are certainly going to like that. It's now time to move on to the negative points section, and I have a couple of these to talk about here as well. And the first of these comes from a graphical design perspective, and that is that, first of all, the fold cost on the cards is this small number on top of a little fold icon. And I understand why the fold icon is there, that makes sense, but there have been many times where we have had trouble with that, like just kind of reading the number or parsing it as we're trying to do the math with all the things in our hand. And I will admit there have been several times where we've just screwed up and we have this card and it has a fold value of like 2 and a cost of 4, and we just see the 4 and we just say, okay, well, we're going to discard that for 4 folds. And we're like, no, 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 that's 2 folds. Wait a minute, my plan's completely wrong. Bring that back in my hand and try to work with it. And I just feel like maybe there could have been some way to pull those numbers apart, make the folds much bigger and more obvious as to what it is to help this planning section. And the other thing that's going on here with the graphics on the cards comes in with the special action or the instant action. And on one hand, you might say, well, they did a good job because there's like little dots on one of them and solid lines on another one. But I can say that consistently every time I played this, multiple people have screwed up those two things, and they've played a card down thinking it was an instant action when actually it was a special action, and now the rest of their combo that they've been building up just doesn't work. And I feel like they could have done something better from a graphical perspective to maybe make the backgrounds on the bottom parts of the card different colors so it would really stand out that like this and this are different. And sure, one says instant and the other one says special action, but it's easy to miss that when you have so many other things that you're looking at on the cards that are in your hand. So I just think that while the cards do look nice, there really could be some tweaks that could happen that would greatly improve the overall gameplay as you were trying to crunch through your decisions. For my other negative point, I'd like to come back to the 5 different suits of animals that come in the game. And on the face of it, I think it's great that you shuffle up a number of those suits equal to the number of players, so you're going to have a different type of deck, realistically, every time you play, until you play a lot of different times, because there's a lot of different perturbations. But my issue is that each one of those decks, in general, feels very inward-looking and doesn't really synergize with anything else. So when you shuffle up maybe 3 of these suits into that deck, it's almost like these cards are like oil and water, where they don't really interact with each other. They work okay side by side, and it tastes okay when you have them both at the same time, but you have like all of the blue ocean cards, they in general give you like discounts or let you play other ocean cards. And you have the Savannah cards, which will let you play free Savannah cards or grab a bunch of Savannah cards from the middle of the table. And I was hoping for the game to be designed in such a way that these suits would have like an idea that would ripple down through the rest of the different suits that are in that given deck so that they would mingle better as opposed to feeling kind of like discrete ideas within that given thing. Like if the ocean cards were all about just discounting everything, not necessarily just other ocean cards, or if you had the Savannah allowing you to get really big things down easily, or just have one of the suits be all about grabbing a bunch of cards or that kind of thing, so that every time you play, you're like, oh, well, we're going to have really discounted cards this time because we have that suit in here, as opposed to like, oh, well, that suit's in here, so it works well within itself, and I hope I have the opportunity to grab more of that one specific suit because that's how they synergize. So I just feel like from a design perspective, that was a little bit of a miss. I'm sorry. I wanted them to mix a lot better mechanically than they actually do. It's now time to discuss the variability for Origami. And if I'm being honest, it is a little less than I expected because what I expected was for there to be actually a lot of variability in the game because I went into it knowing that you had these 5 different suits and you would be shuffling up different sets of them into that deck and trying to have a different experience each time. And there are 2 things that kind of hurt that, and I've already talked about them before. One is that I just don't like the bird suit. So for me, I'm probably just going to leave that in the box permanently, which means now I only have 4 different suits to shuffle up within each other, which still gives you quite a few options if you're playing at 3 players. But if you're playing 4 players, you're going to be playing the same game every time if you decide to not play with the birds. And the other thing, like I just mentioned in the negative section, is I feel like the suits don't mechanically intermingle very well. They kind of feel like they just give you discounts and help you with other things within that one given suit. So I feel like I was expecting there to be a ton of variability in this box, and maybe that expectation was just a little bit too high. When you factor these other things in, the variability is still fine. It's just not quite where I was hoping it would be. When it comes to player count, Origami supports 2, 3, and 4 players. And I've played the 2 and 4 player game. I never actually had an opportunity to play a 3 player game, although I think that's likely to happen at some point in the future. But what I can say is 3 is probably the best way to play this game, even though I can't actually say that I've played it at that one, because at the 2 player count, the game worked fine, but the issue is that you only shuffle 2 of those decks together, and that means there are a lot of different options, but it also means that as you're playing the game, you're only seeing those 2 different types, and it is a little bit more fun to see more of those come through the game. And when it comes to the 4 player experience, I did find that downtime could start to sneak in because people can get some pretty big hands, and there's a lot of things to think about as they're chewing through them. And by and large, unless you're playing with the birds, you're not actually interacting with your opponents all that much beyond, of course, trying to draft cards from the middle and hope that maybe nobody drafts that one card that you really want. So 4 was okay, but I think 3 is going to be the best because it gives you 3 different suits to choose from. It gives you a much wider variety of perturbations than the 4 player game when it comes to the different suits that are shuffled up into that deck. And I do think that 2 was okay, but I think 3 is going to be the sweet spot for it. In conclusion, I've played Origami 3 times at this point, and I am hoping to get some more plays in because I've enjoyed all of the plays of this game that I've had so far. I think that the ideas that come into this game are some really good ones because you have some neat tweaks when it comes to the cards as currency mechanism, where you have to exactly hit the cost to play these cards out, and each card is worth a differing amount of folds that you are spending to play these cards down. But also, I like the idea that you are shuffling up this deck and you'll have a different set of these suits and these animals in there that you're playing with every time you sit down to play the game, or at least until you've played this game a whole bunch of times. But there have been a couple things that brought me back a little bit from excitedly shouting about this game from the mountaintops. One being that the suits don't really commingle with each other mechanically as much as I would have liked, and also just some graphical issues that maybe caused some hiccups and maybe a little bit more downtime than I would have liked because people realized they'd screwed up their plan because they kind of misread the numbers or misread the ability that's down at the bottom of the card. But when I take all these things into account, I can say that this is a pretty cool game. Like, it's got good decisions that come into play with the plans that you're trying to build. It's got satisfying combos that you can put down, and it's got wonderful art, and all of that comes together in a very small little box. And it might not be perfect, but I do think that this game is very expandable, and I think that that would probably help the game out a lot if the game did come out with new expansions in the future that maybe did mingle with each other from a mechanical perspective more. But even if they didn't, if they stuck to the way the game is right now, I wouldn't mind having a few more in there to shuffle in, mostly because, as I mentioned before, the bird deck is built around interacting with your opponents and being quite mean, and so I don't like playing with that, which means you kind of hit the variability of the different types of things you can have in the main shuffle when you pull one of them out essentially permanently, and that's what's going to be happening with me. So at the end of the day, I recommend this game. I don't think it's very easy to get a copy of it right now, but I have seen word that it's probably going to hit US distribution at some point in 2018, and I hope it does because I think this is a pretty cool game that more people should have experience with because I have enjoyed it. And like I said before, I'm hoping to get some more plays in of this one, specifically at 3 players, because that's probably the best way to do it. As always, I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting this channel through Patreon, including all of these producer level pledges. If you too would like to directly support the channel, you could do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.